Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the members' comments on this bill. I have a question just about how he feels about investor-state dispute settlements being removed from the agreement, and also about Article 22, which limits state-owned corporations. And in light of that, how he feels about the Canada-China FIPA, which was an investment treaty, not a trade agreement, but that was pushed through by the Harper government without any debate in this House, where Chinese state-owned corporations can use investor-state to seek compensation for the loss of potential profit when our laws and policies get in the way of their profitability. And so I'm just curious about how he feels about investor-state agreements in trade agreements, about state-owned corporations, and how he feels about the Canada-China FIPA in light of those things.
Honourable Member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola has just a little over 1 minute to respond.
Oh, okay, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll focus because the members seem to really show the most offence the Canada-China FIPA, so I'm going to address that straight away. First of all, the members should review the Constitution. It's the executive, in this case, the Prime Minister and Cabinet, that actually have the authority to enter into agreements with other countries. But it was actually the Harper government that made changes that allowed for those agreements to be tabled for 21 days here so that parliamentarians can review them. Now, if he and his leader want to win, enough seats that they can form an official party, they can make that the question of their opposition day. But I will say this, Madam Speaker, when we push Canadian companies to go out and sell their products and services abroad, and they choose to enter a place like China, or maybe they do not feel that they are going to get treated the same way in a rule of law country like Canada, like the United States, like many in the European Union, Madam Speaker, where they know that there's due process, there's similar values in that due process, they would then say, how am I to protect myself in case I have a confiscation without being compensated for it, Madam Speaker? And so having that process in place in places like China allows some protections, and I'd be happy to speak with the member further about his views.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honor to stand here today and engage in the debate on NAFTA. Many of my constituents in Nanaimo, Ladysmith will know that I'm very passionate about trade issues and concerned about international trade and investment agreements. I was really interested, well actually first of all I want to say that the Green Party of Canada supports trade. We think it's a vital part of our economy. But what we want to see in trade agreements is respect for the environmental regulations, labor standards, health and safety standards, and consumer protections. And that these things should be increased in trade agreements, the way that the European Union does with countries that enter the European Union must increase their standards and regulations to meet the highest standards in the Union. And we think that those kind of approaches to international trade are important. About 15 years ago, I was really focused on a lot of local issues and working on films about local water. And somebody asked me if I knew anything about the Security and Prosperity Partnership, the SPP. And I didn't. And so I went off to Ottawa here to go to the People's Summit and learn about the SPP. And I went down to Montebello to document the protests that were happening there. And I happened to videotape 3 police officers who were dressed as radicals with masks on and looking like radical protesters who were attacking their own riot squad. And they were unmasked in the process, and all of their boots matched with the riot squad. And it raised questions for me about why the police would be involved in this kind of incitement, like I have footage of them banging rocks into shields, etc., why they would be involved in this kind of incitement at a peaceful protest, and they were later proven to be police officers. So I got interested in the Security and Prosperity Partnership, and I started to dig in. And what I found was that in this process, it was a deep integration of Canada, the United States, and Mexico as part of Fortress North America after 9/11. But it also included integration of our regulatory standards. And when I looked at who was negotiating on behalf of Canada for these regulatory standards, there was 20 corporations for each of the three countries, Mexico, the United States, and Canada. And there were some great Canadian corporations who were representing Canada in this negotiation process. Companies like Home Depot Canada, Walmart Canada, Chevron Canada, Ford Canada, some great Canadian names. And I started to study trade agreements a little bit more and found that really there was no involvement in civil society in these agreements. These were corporate agreements. And so I really appreciate in this new version of NAFTA that the government has involved labor organizations and environmental organizations as part of the negotiating process. And I see that as progress. This is what we need to be doing in our negotiations on international trade and investment, that they can't just be secretive processes where the corporations and the bureaucrats are involved only. We need people who represent consumers, workers, environmentalists, and so that we have a fair process, that we can look at all aspects of trade and make sure that our regulations and standards are protected. So one of the other things that I learned working on this film was about investor-state dispute settlements. And this is a process. Chapter 11 in NAFTA was the first time that a developed country had signed on to this. This was something that the Europeans had used with their former colonial states to kind of keep corporate control over mineral extraction, etc. But this was the first time it was used in a developing, with a developed country. And Chapter 11, when I was looking at it, there was cases like Ethel Corporation, who got $5 million for when Canada blocked the use of MMT, an additive that was a neurotoxin in gasoline. And they said it was an unfair trade practice to ban that. There's things in these investment chapters like indirect expropriation. We all know what expropriation is, but indirect expropriation. I just have 2 minutes left? Okay. So, national treatment, most favored nation status. These are all things that are used by corporations to challenge our laws and policies. And so I was really happy to see that investor state was taken out of the new NAFTA. If you look at cases like Bilcon, where a foreign corporation is challenging our environmental assessment process and getting $7 million for doing nothing, it's not a process that makes sense. And we see this used as a big stick by mining companies to get developed countries to accept mining and extraction projects. We do need to do something about softwood lumber. That's a really important issue in my community. I'm also concerned about the extension of patents for pharmaceuticals from 8 years to 10 years and how, for biologics, and how that will affect the cost of drugs. And we see many people, seniors in particular, who are having to make decisions about what they spend their money on, rent, food, or pharmaceuticals. Article 22, the state-owned chapter, has a carve-out for the Trans Mountain Expansion Project. So that's a concern for me as well. And I see my time is up, so thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.